The venue was one of those places that charges you for the air you breathe. It was a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick, fairy lights, and polished concrete floors. The air hummed with the low, expensive murmur of people who were busy impressing each other. It was an engagement party for one of Claire's work friends. Someone I barely knew, but whose life updates Claire followed like scripture. I parked the car a block away. The engine ticked as it cooled, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. I looked over at Amanda. "You ready for this?" I asked. My hands were on the wheel. Steady, surprisingly steady. Amanda smoothed the fabric of her dress. It was black, simple, elegant. No sequins, no plunging neckline, just a quiet confidence stitched into the seams. She looked at me, and her eyes were fierce. "The question is," she said, "is she ready for you?" I smiled. A dry, humorless thing. "Let's find out." We walked to the entrance together. The night air was cool, but I felt hot, a low-level bird of adrenaline sitting at the base of my neck. I offered Amanda my arm. She took it without hesitation, her grip firm. It wasn't romantic cling. It was an anchor, a signal. We are a unit. We stepped through the heavy double doors. The noise hit us first. A wall of laughter, clinking glass, and a jazz cover of a top 40 song that had been stripped of all its original energy. The room was packed. It didn't take me long to find her. Claire was standing near the patio doors, holding court. She had a wine glass in one hand, gesturing gracefully with the other. She was wearing the emerald dress. I knew that dress. It was a heavy artillery. It was silk, form-fitting, backless. It was a dress she saved for events where she needed to be the most stunning woman in the room, where she needed to remind everyone that she was the main character. She looked beautiful. Objectively, breathtakingly beautiful. And she looked completely fake. From where I stood, I could see the tightness in her smile. I could see the way her eyes darted around the room, even while she was nodding at someone's story. She was scanning, hunting for validation. She hadn't seen me yet. "She's over there." I murmured to Amanda. "Green dress." Amanda looked. She studied Claire for a moment, like an art critic assessing a forgery. "She looks tense." "She is." We moved into the room. We didn't rush. We walked with a casual pace of people who belonged there. Heads turned as we passed. A few people recognized me. Friends of friends, colleagues of Claire's, and their smiles faltered when they saw who was on my arm. They knew Claire. They didn't know Amanda. The confusion rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in a pond. And then Claire looked up. Her eyes swept over the crowd, bored and restless, until they landed on us. She froze. It was microscopic, but I saw it. The hand holding the wine glass tightened until her knuckles went white. Her smile didn't just fade. It glitched. It hung there for a split second, a relic of a previous conversation, before crumbling into shock. She stared at me. Then her eyes slid to Amanda. Recognition flashed. Then confusion. Then something darker. Fear. She excused herself from her circle. I watched her lips move. "Excuse me, just a sec." And she made her way toward us. She didn't float this time. She marched. Her steps were clipped, precise. She was trying to regain control of a room that had just spun off its axis. "Adam," she said as she reached us. Her voice was pitched a little too high. "I didn't expect to see you here." She didn't lean in for a kiss. She didn't touch me. She stood 3 feet away, a defensive distance. "I figured I'd stop by," I said casually, keeping my voice low and even. "Catch up. Celebrate." Her eyes flicked to Amanda again. It was a glare that could peel paint, but she smoothed it over instantly. "And you brought company." "Amanda," I said, turning slightly to present her. "You remember Claire?" Amanda offered a polite, razor-thin smile. "It's been a long time, Claire." Claire's jaw worked. She remembered. Of course she remembered. She remembered the late nights in college. The inside joke she wasn't part of. The threat she had always perceived Amanda to be. "Yes," Claire said, her voice dropping to a chill. "It has." There was a pause. A heavy, suffocating silence that the party noise couldn't penetrate. Claire looked at me, then back at Amanda, and I could see the wheels turn behind her eyes. She was doing the math. Why are they together? How long have they been talking? What has he told her? She was calculating the blast radius. "I didn't realize you two were still close," Claire said slowly, testing the waters. I smiled. It felt good to smile. We've been reconnecting. It's been refreshing. I let the word land. Refreshing. The implication was clear. Unlike my life at home. Amanda rested her hand lightly on my forearm. It was a small gesture, barely anything, but Claire's eyes snapped to it like a magnet. Claire shifted her weight. She took a sip of her wine, probably to buy herself time to think. When she lowered the glass, she tried to reset the board. "Well," she said, forcing a brightness that made her sound manic, "it's a great party. Have you seen the cake? It's ridiculous." I ignored the small talk. I wasn't here to talk about cake. I looked around the room, making a show of scanning the crowd. "Is Blake here?" The question was a grenade. Claire's lips parted. Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected me to say his name. Not here. Not in public. Not in front of a witness. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Why?" I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the crowd, then bringing them back to hers. Just wondered if the guest list had changed. You know how these things go. Sometimes people just show up. She went pale. She knew exactly what I was referencing. She knew I was talking about the girls' only night. She looked at Amanda, then back at me. She realized suddenly that she was outnumbered. She wasn't dealing with a husband she could manipulate in the privacy of our kitchen. She was dealing with a man who had brought backup. "Adam," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Can we talk? Privately?" She gestured toward the hallway, away from the eyes and ears of her social circle. She wanted to pull me into the shadows where she could twist the narrative, where she could cry, where she could accuse me of embarrassing her. I looked at the hallway. Then I looked at her. "No," I said. Claire blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, gentle but firm, like speaking to a child who doesn't understand the rules. "I don't think so." "Adam, please," she hissed, her composure fraying at the edges. "You're making a scene." "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I'm standing here, having a drink with a friend. You're the one who looks like she's about to snap." People were watching now, not obviously, but with that peripheral curiosity. They saw the tension in Claire's shoulders. They saw the way I was standing, relaxed, unbothered. Claire realized it too. She looked around, panicked. This was her nightmare, losing control of the image. I leaned in slightly, invading her personal space just enough to lower my voice so only she could hear it. "You can stop pretending now, Claire." She swallowed hard. Her eyes were wet, shimmering with a mix of rage and terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to launch one of her famous defenses. But nothing came out. For the first time in our marriage, she had no comeback. She had no spin. She was checkmated in the middle of a cocktail party. I pulled back. I didn't wait for her to recover. I didn't wait for her to come up with a lie. I turned to Amanda. "You ready to go?" Amanda nodded, her expression serene. "Yeah, I think we've seen enough." "Adam," Claire started, reaching out a hand. I didn't stop. I took Amanda's hand, not her arm, her hand, and interlaced our fingers. It was bold. It was final. We turned and walked toward the exit. I could feel Claire's eyes burning into my back. I could feel the silence radiating from where she stood. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. Claire stood in the kitchen the next morning, stirring her tea like it was the only thing keeping her upright. There was no music today, no barefoot dancing, no humming to a pop song while flipping pancakes. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic clink-clink-clink of the spoon hitting the sides of the ceramic mug. She was staring into the dark liquid, watching a vortex that wasn't there. I walked in, my socks off on the tile. The air in the house had changed overnight. It wasn't explosive anymore. It wasn't charged with the static of secrets and lies. It felt sterilized, like a hospital room after the patient has already been moved. "I made an appointment," she said. She didn't look up. Her voice was flat, devoid of the theatricality she'd been using for weeks. I paused mid-step, my hand hovering over the cabinet handle where the coffee mugs were kept. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Couples therapy," she said. "Dr. Evans." She had a cancellation for Tuesday afternoon. I took it. I looked at her back. The slope of her shoulders was different, heavier. The stiffness in her arms suggested she was holding herself together by sheer will. "Just one session," she added quickly. Finally turned to face me. Her eyes were swollen, the skin beneath them bruised with fatigue. "To talk. To try." I pulled a mug down from the shelf. It was one we bought on our honeymoon, a stupid, overpriced piece of pottery from a roadside stand in Napa. I stared at it. "Claire," I said, my voice low, You know where I stand." "I know," she said, her hands tightening around her tea. "You said it's over. I heard you, but I want you to hear everything. Not the defensive version, not the panic version. I want you to understand where I failed, where we failed." I poured my coffee. The steam rose up, smelling of roasted beans and inevitability. Bitterness on top of bitterness. "And you think a stranger with a notepad is going to fix that?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think it will fix it. I think it will explain it." She took a step toward me, then stopped, respecting the invisible line I'd drawn on the floor. "You said you wanted to understand who you married," she whispered. "So let me try to show you. Please, Adam, if we're going to end this, let's not do it with half-truths." I sipped my coffee. It was too hot, scalding my tongue. I welcomed the pain. It was grounding. I looked at her. I didn't see the villain I'd painted in my head over the last week. I didn't see the monster. I just saw a woman who had made a series of terrible, selfish choices and was now standing in the wreckage, holding a broom. "All right," I said. "Tuesday." That was all I gave her. It was a crumb, but for her, it was a loaf of bread. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes again, but she didn't come closer. She knew better. The next 2 days passed like a scene played on a loop. We lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, though I stayed on the absolute edge of my side, back turned, and ate at the same table. But we were no longer husband and wife. We were like two ghosts haunting the same hallway, occasionally bumping into each other's ectoplasm. The dinners were quiet, polite. "Can you pass the salt?" "Did you remember to pay the electric bill?" There were no fights. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard residue. The house had become an operating room where nothing lived but memory and precision. We moved around each other with careful choreography. I spent a lot of time in the backyard, staring at the fence that needed painting. I thought about the life we had planned, the renovations, the trips, the kids we talked about having in a year or two. All of it felt like a story I'd read in a book a long time ago, something that happened to other people. When Tuesday came, we drove to the session in separate cars. I didn't want to be trapped in a vehicle with her for 30 minutes. I didn't want the forced intimacy of the passenger seat. I needed my own music, my own air, my own escape route. The therapist's office was in a generic medical building, the kind with beige carpets and ficus plants that gathered dust in the corners. The waiting room smelled intensely of lavender and old magazines. We sat in chairs on opposite sides of the room. Claire stared at a painting of a sailboat. I stared at my phone, reading emails I didn't care about. "Adam? Claire." Dr. Evans was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a demeanor that suggested she had heard every variation of human misery there was. She welcomed us and like we weren't dragging the corpse of a marriage into her workspace. The office was soft. Leather chairs, dim lamps, a box of tissues strategically placed on the small table between us. We sat down. "So," Dr. Evans began, clasping her hands, "what brings you in today?" Claire did most of the talking. For the first 20 minutes, I barely spoke. I sat back, watching. I was witnessing an autopsy. Claire spoke with a trembling honesty I hadn't seen in years. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her fingers looked waxen. She admitted to the attention she craved. She talked about the last year, how work had been stressful, how she felt like she was aging, how she felt invisible. "I felt like furniture," she said, her voice cracking. "Adam is great. He's reliable. He's always there. But somewhere along the way, I felt like he stopped seeing me. I became a function. The wife. The roommate." She took a breath, glancing at me, then quickly away. And then Blake. He was just there. He was new. He asked questions. He looked at me like I was interesting. Dr. Evans nodded, scribbling something on her pad. And that felt validating. "It felt like a drug," Claire admitted. "I know how that sounds. But it was addictive. The dopamine hit of a notification. The secret jokes. It made me feel young again. Desirable. So you pursued it?" Dr. Evans asked. "I didn't think of it as pursuing," Claire said, tears spilling over now. "I told myself it was harmless. I told myself, I'm not sleeping with him. I still come home to Adam. I'm still cooking dinner." I convinced myself that I could compartmentalize it. She looked at the therapist, pleading for understanding. I thought if I told Adam, he'd leave, and then I'd lose the safety, the history. So I convinced myself it wasn't really cheating. I told myself I was just supplementing. that I was keeping the marriage alive by getting my emotional needs met elsewhere, so I wouldn't resent him. The room went silent. That was the dagger, the twisted logic of the betrayer. I cheated on you to save us. Dr. Evans turned to me. Her gaze was gentle but weighty. Adam, she said, what are you hearing? I looked at Claire. She was wiping her face with a tissue, looking small and broken. I'm hearing, I said, my voice steady, that she wanted to have her cake and eat it too. Claire flinched. I'm hearing, I continued, that she viewed our marriage not as a partnership, but as a safety net. Something to fall back on while she went out and played on the high wire. Claire was standing in the ruins of her own performance. She was a woman in a beautiful emerald dress, holding a glass of expensive wine, surrounded by people who thought they knew her. But she was completely, utterly alone. And this time, I was the one walking away first. The drive back to the house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Amanda sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past. I felt a strange vibration in my chest, shaking off the adrenaline, processing the victory. It didn't feel like triumph, exactly. It felt like amputation. Painful, necessary, and irreversible. You okay? Amanda asked softly as we pulled up to a red light. I looked at her. I think so. Yeah. She looked terrified. Amanda said, I've never seen someone look so exposed. She's never been caught before. I said, not really. She's always been able to talk her way out of it. Tonight, the words didn't work. You did good, Adam, she said. I dropped Amanda off at her hotel again. This time, the goodbye was heavier. We both knew that the next part, the part that happened when I went home, was something I had to do alone. Call me, she said, standing by the curb. If you need anything, even if it's just to sit in silence. I will, I promised. I drove the rest of the way home on autopilot. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Claire's car was there. She had beaten me back. She must have left the party right after we did. I cut the engine and sat in the dark driveway for a minute. I looked at the house. It used to be my sanctuary. We bought it thinking about where the Christmas tree would go, which room would be the nursery. Now, it was just a structure of wood and brick that held too many lies. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain coming. I opened the car door and walked up the path. I didn't fumble for my keys. I unlocked the door with a steady hand. The house was silent. No music, no TV, no humming from the kitchen. Just the dim hallway shadows and that heavy, thick stillness that tells you something is waiting behind it. Claire was home. I could feel in the air, the charge, the static. I walked into the living room. She was sitting on the edge of the couch. She wasn't lounging. She was perched on the edge, knees together, hands clasped in her lap. She had changed out of the emerald dress. She was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. Her makeup was wiped off, leaving her face pale and stark. She looked human. She looked small. Her phone sat face down on the coffee table. A glass of water, untouched, sat beside it. She didn't flinch when I walked in. She didn't look up immediately. She just stared at the floor at a spot on the rug. Can we talk? She asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. It cracked in the middle. I looked at her. I didn't feel the anger I expected. I didn't feel the urge to yell. I just felt tired. I walked over and sat in the armchair across from her. I didn't sit on the couch. I needed the distance. I needed the barrier of the coffee table between us. I'm listening, I said. She looked up then. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying, but she wasn't crying now. She was past the hysterical phase. She was in the numb phase. She searched my face, looking for the usual emotion, anger, disappointment, pleading, anything she could latch on to, anything she could work with. She didn't find it. Just tell me why, I said. It wasn't a demand. It was a request for closure, not to fix anything. I just need to understand who I married. Her mouth opened, then closed. The words weren't coming easy now. The script was gone. The audience had left. After a long, painful pause, she took a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to start like that, she said. Like what? I asked. Blake. She nodded, a jerky motion. He listened, Adam. He laughed at things you'd barely look up from your phone for. He noticed when I cut my hair. He noticed when I changed my perfume. And you couldn't just ask me to do the same? I asked quietly. She hesitated. I did. You didn't hear it. That landed. It stung. I wasn't perfect. I knew that. I had been busy, stressed with work, maybe distant at times. You mean I didn't hear you enough? I corrected. Or you didn't try again. You just switched off, Claire. You turned away from me and turned toward someone else because it was easier. She winced. Not from volume. There was none. Just from the truth. It was only once, she said, her voice trembling. We didn't sleep together. I ended it before it could become something bigger. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. And the messages? I asked. The secrecy? The gaslighting? The way you made me feel like I was losing my mind every time I asked a simple question. She blinked, tears finally spilling over. I panicked. I thought if I admitted it, even the emotional part, everything would explode. I thought I could kill it quietly. I thought if I just ignored it, it would go away. But it didn't, I said. Guilt doesn't go away, Claire. It just sits there, like a guest you keep feeding instead of asking to leave. She looked away, ashamed. I thought I could control it. I thought I could keep everything in balance. You mean you wanted both worlds? I said. Me? Steady, safe, reliable Adam. And him? Exciting, validating, fresh attention. She didn't deny it. She just wept silently. I exhaled a long, slow release of breath. I would have forgiven the truth, I said quietly. Her head snapped up. I would have, I continued, if you had come to me months ago. If you had said, Adam, I'm struggling. I'm feeling disconnected. I made a mistake. We could have worked on that. I stood up. But you never gave me the chance, I said. You buried the problem in charm and deflection. You lied to my face. You lied to your friends. And I buried myself trying to believe you. I was scared, she whispered. So was I. I replied, scared I was losing my mind. Scared that the woman I loved was slipping through my fingers. Scared that maybe I was broken. I walked toward the stairs. I stopped at the bottom step and looked back at her. Turns out I wasn't broken, I said. I was just being played. She looked at me then, really looked, and her eyes were brimming with something bitter and quiet. Regret. I still love you, she said. It sounded desperate. Hollow. I shook my head. No, I said. You love the version of me that didn't know. You love the safety net. You love the audience. Are you going to leave me? She asked. I looked down at my hands. I thought about the beach town I used to visit. I thought about Amanda's calm smile. I thought about the peace I felt in the car. You left first, Claire, I said. You just didn't walk out the door when you did it. Her breath hitched. A sob broke loose from her chest. I'm not trying to punish you, I added gently. I just don't want to keep bleeding in a house that keeps opening the same wound. I turned and walked up the stairs. I heard her crying in the living room. It was a mournful, lonely sound. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't go back down to fix it. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was flattering, but because I realized she was right. I had changed. The pain of the last few months had hardened me. Yes, but it had also clarified things. I wasn't just trying to salvage a dying marriage anymore. I was trying to reclaim myself. By the time we reached her hotel, the sky had gone a deep, bruised blue. She paused at the revolving glass doors, her hands deep in her coat pockets. So, she said, what's the plan for the party? I looked at her. I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost knocked the wind out of me. We go in, I said. We smile. We let her feel it. Amanda smiled. It was a sharp, satisfied look. Sounds like a plan. Thank you, I said, for listening, for this. Anytime, she said. See you, Adam. I watched her disappear through the glass doors, watching until she was just a silhouette in the lobby. Then, I turned back toward the sidewalk. The walk to my car was about 10 minutes. Usually, when I walked alone at night lately, my head was full of noise, arguments I wanted to have, questions I was afraid to ask, scenarios playing out on a loop. But tonight, the silence was peaceful. I got into my car, started the engine, and didn't immediately drive off. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I thought about Claire at home, probably rehearsing her next lie, probably texting Blake about how annoying I was being. And for the first time in months, I didn't care. I wasn't dragging my heart behind me anymore. I had picked it up. I had dusted it off. And I was ready to bring it into the light, even if it meant burning everything down to do it. I put the car in drive and pulled out into traffic. The road ahead was clear. I'm home, I said, mimicking her casual tone. She messaged me out of the blue, said she's here for a few days on business. Wanted to grab a drink. I figured, why not? Claire looked up, forcing a small, polite smile. It looked painful. That's great. It's been a while. It had been a while. Years. But Claire remembered Amanda. Amanda was smart, sharp, and possessed a kind of natural warmth that made people gravitate toward her. She was the kind of woman who saw through people instantly, and Claire had never liked that. She had never liked Amanda. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe she felt threatened. Or maybe she knew that Amanda was the one person who could look at our marriage and see the cracks I was trying to ignore. Yeah, I said, picking up my coffee. We were pretty close back then. Remember? Study partners, library nights. She helped me pull that all-nighter before my capstone defense. Claire gave a tight laugh. You mentioned her once or twice. Oh, she mentioned you too, I added lightly. Said you used to glare at her every time she came over. Claire set her toast down. She was done eating. I didn't press. I didn't smirk. I just sipped my coffee, my eyes calm over the rim. I let it sit. A crack had formed in her performance, and I saw it clearly. The quiet tension in her posture, the way she wasn't chewing anymore, the way her hand hovered near her phone. She was trying to keep the smile plastered on, but her eyes had gone still. Predatory. Anyway, I added, driving the point home, since you'll be out tonight with the girls. I figured I might meet up with Amanda. Probably nothing wild. Just drinks. A bit of catching up on the old days. Claire nodded, slow and cautious. She was calculating. Is he doing this to get back at me? Does he still have feeling for her? Is this a threat? Sure, she said, her voice a little higher than usual. Sounds like fun. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. Her act never fully broke, but the energy in the room shifted. I watched her wash the dishes more aggressively than usual, clanging the plates together. I watched her check her phone 3 times in 1 minute, typing out furious, short bursts of text. She was trying to stay cool. But here's the thing. Claire hated Amanda. Not because Amanda ever did anything wrong, but because Amanda was unfiltered and genuine. I had just handed Claire a mirror, and she didn't like the reflection. That evening, the transformation began. As she prepared for her girls-only party, she didn't just get dressed. She armed herself. She wore red lipstick, a shade she hadn't touched in months. Her perfume was heavier, a cloud of vanilla and musk that filled the hallway. Her heels were higher, the kind that clicked with authority. Have fun, I said as she grabbed her purse in the foyer. You too, she replied quickly. She had her hand on the doorknob, eager to escape, but she hesitated. She turned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Tell Amanda I said hi. I nodded, holding her gaze, refusing to blink. I will. The second the door clicked shut, I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my shoulders. I didn't actually plan to meet Amanda tonight. Not yet. I hadn't even confirmed the time. But I had baited the hook. And from a flicker of panic in Claire's eyes, I knew she'd bitten down hard. I didn't leave the house that night. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat in the living room alone. The soft hum of the TV filled the silence while I stared at a nature documentary I couldn't even remember the title of. A lion was stalking a gazelle in high definition, and I felt a strange kinship with the predator. My phone buzzed once. I ignored it. I wasn't waiting on a message. I was watching the clock. Claire had left over an hour ago. She hadn't said much when she walked out, just flashed a quick smile and told me not to wait up. I had no intention of waiting up, but I had every intention of finding out the truth. At 9:45 p.m., I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and walked back to the living room with a calm that didn't match the magma boiling under my skin. That's when I picked up her old iPad. She'd left it on the armrest of the couch, tucked under a throw pillow. She usually took it everywhere, but tonight, in her rush to get to the girls and away from the specter of Amanda, she'd slipped. It was almost too easy. You're seriously bringing this up again? Claire's voice didn't just break the silence. It sliced through it like a serrated knife. It was sharp, annoyed, and laced with that specific brand of exhaustion that she reserved solely for me these days. He's my best friend, Adam. I'm not going to apologize for that. I stared at her from across the kitchen island, my fingers tightening around the ceramic handle of my coffee mug until my knuckles turned white. The morning sun was streaming through the window, hitting the subway tiles and painting the room in a soft, deceptive gold. It looked like a scene from a catalog. The perfect kitchen, the perfect light, the perfect wife leaning against a marble counter. But the warmth felt fake. It felt like a spotlight in some twisted stage play where everyone knew their lines except me. He texted you at midnight. I said, my voice barely steady. I wasn't yelling. I was past yelling. We were in bed. Claire. The phone lit up the room. And you turn it face down before I could even blink. That's not friendship. That's hiding something. Claire didn't even flinch. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes bored, looking everywhere but at me. She crossed her arms, creating that familiar physical barrier between us. It was a funny meme. Adam. God forbid I laugh without asking your permission first. Do I need to sign a waiver to have a sense of humor now? I stood up slowly. The wooden chair leg scraped against the tile, a harsh, grating sound that acted like a warning bell. You don't get to flip this, I said, stepping into her space. I'm not the one sneaking around. I'm not the one acting like I'm 12 texts away from an affair. Her laugh was short, sharp, and cruel. You're being ridiculous. That word hit me like a backhand. Ridiculous. It was her favorite weapon. If she could make me feel small, if she could paint me as a crazy, jealous husband, she didn't have to answer for anything. I took another step closer. You've been texting him every night for weeks. You changed your passcode. Don't think I didn't notice. You call him when you're running errands, but you forget to mention it until I find the call log. And every single time I ask you about it, you call me insecure. Because you are, she snapped, her composure finally cracking just enough to show the anger underneath. A grown man throwing a tantrum over a friendship. You need help, Adam. You're suffocating. I slammed my palm on the table. Hard. The mugs rattled. The spoon in the sugar bowl chimed. Something inside my chest, something that had been holding on by a thread for months, finally snapped. Then leave. I barked, the volume of my own voice surprising me. Go run to him. Call it what it is. Claire, it's an emotional affair at best, and I'm done pretending I don't see it. Claire narrowed her eyes. The mask of the annoyed wife dropped, revealing something colder, something resentful. You think I'd choose you right now? Over someone who actually listens? Who doesn't sulk around the house like a ghost haunting his own life? I blinked, stunned. The air left my lungs. So that's what I am now. I whispered. A ghost. She didn't answer right away. She just sipped her coffee, deliberately, slowly, looking me dead in the eye while she did it. She had just gutted me, stripped away my dignity, and she was drinking a light roast like it was just another Tuesday. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about a meme. It wasn't about her best friend, Blake. It wasn't about me being overbearing. This was about power. She was holding the reins, jerking them left and right, watching me stumble while she decided if I was worth keeping around. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was annoyed that I was making it difficult for her to have her cake and eat it too. You're not scared of me being wrong, I said quietly, the realization settling over me like ice water. You're scared I might be right. For the first time, her eye twitched, just barely. A tiny spasm in the lower lid. But it was there. The tell. Wow, she muttered, shaking her head. You really are spiraling. No, I said, backing toward the back door. I needed air. I needed out of this house that smelled like her perfume in my desperation. I'm waking up. I grabbed my keys from the hook. My voice dropped low, steady and cold. And you should be scared of that. The door slammed behind me, shaking the frame. Outside, the morning light followed me like a lie unraveling. The air was crisp, clean, real. I sucked in a breath. My fists clenched so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. Our marriage didn't just crack in that kitchen. It fractured. And as I stood there, staring at the driveway, all I could think was, I need to know for sure. Because if I'm going to walk away, I'm not going to do it as a crazy, insecure husband. I'm going to do it with my head high and the truth in my hand. The next morning, you'd think none of it had happened. It was psychological whiplash. I walked into the kitchen, bracing for a fight or the silent treatment, but instead, I found a musical number. Claire was humming to herself while flipping pancakes, swaying her hips to some mindless pop song blasting from her phone. The kitchen smelled like butter, vanilla, and maple syrup. It was comforting. It was ordinary. It was terrifying. I couldn't stop watching her. It was like watching a character on stage playing a role for an audience of one. She was performing the happy wife. She set a plate in front of me with a little smile, kissed my cheek, and breezed past me like she hadn't all but dared me to leave the night before. So, she said, sliding into her seat and shaking out her napkin, we're doing a girls-only thing tonight. Just wine, movies, board games. Dana is bringing that weird goat cheese again. She laughed lightly, then bit into her toast. The crunch echoed in the silence. I watched her chew, nodding slowly. Her tone was airy. Her face relaxed, but her eyes flicked toward me a little too often. She was checking the temperature. She was checking to see if I bought the act. She wanted to see if the ghost had gone back to being invisible. Girls only, huh? I said calmly, setting my fork down. I didn't eat. I couldn't. That's nice. She smiled again, tight at the corners. Yep, all of us. No guys allowed. Just catching up, venting about work. You know how it is. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. I let it hang there until it became uncomfortable, until she had to stop chewing to look at me. Then, casual as flipping a page in a magazine, I dropped the match. Amanda's in town. The name landed with a thud. Claire's butter knife froze mid-spread. It was just for a beat, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. Her entire system rebooted. Then, she forced her hand to continue moving, spreading the butter, but slower now, more deliberate. Amanda? She asked, keeping her eyes on the toast. Your friend from college, Amanda? It was an iPad, one of the older models we used to use for recipes or streaming music while cooking. She left it tucked between the cushions, forgotten in her haste to leave. My heart hammered against my ribs, a physical thudding that seemed too loud for a quiet room. I sat down, the leather of the couch creaking beneath me. I pressed the home button. Enter passcode. My thumb hovered. She had changed the code on her phone. That much I knew. It had been the first red flag, the first brick in the wall she was building between us. But people are creatures of habit, and they are often lazy with secondary devices. I punched in our anniversary. Unlock. The screen lit up bright and exposing. I didn't feel relief. I felt a sickening kind of dread. It was a feeling of standing on a ledge, knowing you have to look down. I opened iMessage. The device was synced to her iCloud. It hadn't updated in the last hour since she left the house, but everything prior was there. I scrolled slowly. No calls to him today, at least not that the iPad had caught, but there were 3 from the day before. One at 11:12 p.m. when I was asleep beside her, one around noon, and one marked simply as missed. I clicked the message thread with Blake. It was boring, disappointingly benign. Did you see that email? Running late. Yeah. It was too clean, too sterile. There were no emojis, no flirtation, no long paragraphs complaining about her husband. Just short, clipped text about errands, work, and inside jokes I didn't have the context to understand. But the pattern was loud. It was too frequent, too fast. It was a rhythm of 2 people constantly connected, a digital umbilical cord that never got cut. But then I saw it, the smoking gun I hadn't even been looking for. I backed out to the main list and saw a group chat labeled Girls Night Wine Glass. I stared at the last message she'd sent right before leaving the house. Got the wine. You bring the board game? I tapped the group details to see the participants. There were 5 names. 5 women I knew. Friends of hers I had dinner with. People whose weddings we'd attended. And then there was a 6th name. A name that stuck out like a jagged piece of glass. Blake, her so-called best friend. The one she defended like a wounded animal. The one she swore was just like a brother. The guy she had looked me in the eye and screamed about just 24 hours ago. He was in the girls-only chat. He was going to girls-only party. I stood up abruptly, the iPad slipping from my lap onto the soft cushion. I needed to move. The energy in my body was suddenly toxic, acidic. I paced the hallway, my socks sliding on the hardwood, back and forth. Kitchen to foyer, foyer to kitchen. She lied. It wasn't a lie of omission. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, bold-faced fabrication. She had looked at me, chewed her toast, and sold me a story about a man-free evening while knowing full well he would be pouring the wine. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, gripping the banister. Do I go there? The thought flashed hot and bright. Do I drive over to Dana's house, kick the door down, and catch them? I imagined it. The shock on her face, the stuttering excuses, the satisfaction of blowing up her little charade. No, I forced my hand to unclench from the wood. Not yet. Don't confront. Don't accuse. Not now. That would give her the drama she wanted. She would spin it. She would say, Adam, you're crazy. He just stopped by. You're stalking me. You check my iPad? You're controlling. She would make me the villain of the story. No, I needed to be quiet. I needed to be colder than she was. Calculated. Like a hunter waiting in a blind. I walked back to the couch and placed the iPad exactly where I'd found it. I angled it slightly under the pillow, matching the way it had looked before. Not an inch off. Then, I turned off the lights, walked upstairs to the bedroom, and shut the door behind me. I lay awake for hours. The darkness of the room felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I thought about the way Claire used to curl into my chest after long days, her breathing syncing with mine. I remember how she used to bring me my favorite tea when I was pulling all-nighters for work, setting it down without a word just so I'd know she was there. How she used to ask about my dreams like she actually cared about the answer. And now, I couldn't even recognize the woman who had smirked at me across the kitchen that morning. Who was this person? This actress? At 1:13 a.m., I heard the front door open. The sound was faint, a soft click of the lock, followed by the quiet thud of heavy wood closing. Then, soft footsteps on the stairs. A pause in the hallway. I didn't move. I kept my breathing rhythmic. Slow. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing I was awake, waiting for her like a loyal dog. She slipped quietly into the bathroom. Through the thin wall, I heard the water running, the sound of her brushing her teeth. She was humming. Faintly, but it was there. A happy, mindless tune. Like nothing was broken. Like everything in her world was perfectly fine. When she finally climbed into bed beside me, the mattress dipped gently. Her perfume still clung to her skin, but it was mixed with something else now. The stale scent of indoor air, maybe a hint of someone else's cologne, sweet vanilla, and something sharp I could name. I kept my eyes closed, feigning deep sleep. A moment later, I felt her shift closer. For a second, her body heat radiated toward me. It felt like she was going to curl into me out of habit, reach for my hand, bridge the gap, but she stopped. She hovered there in the dark. Then she turned the other way. I opened my eyes in the dark and stared at the ceiling fan, a shadow against the gray. I didn't touch her. I didn't say a word. But in that silence, the distance between us stretched out into an ocean. The next morning, Claire acted like everything was perfectly ordinary. She was up before me, making coffee, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to an old throwback playlist. She didn't mention the party. She didn't mention the girls. "Morning, babe," she said brightly as I walked in. She handed me a mug, the steam curling up between us. I took it silently, watching her. My hands trembled slightly, adrenaline, lack of sleep, rage, but I kept them steady around the warm ceramic. "Morning." I managed. My voice sounded gravelly and used. She chatted about traffic, a project at work, and some dumb podcast she'd half listened on the drive home. Meaningless noise. Filler. And I listened, but I didn't hear her, because underneath her breezy tone, her energy was different. It was edgy, brittle. She kept looking at me out of the corner of her eye, quick, darting glances while she loaded the dishwasher. She was measuring me, gauging the threat level. Does he know? Is he still mad about the text? She was wondering what I knew. That's when I realized I had the upper hand. For the first time in months, I wasn't a confused husband begging for scraps of attention. I was the observer. I had her on the hook. She just didn't realize yet how far I was willing to reel this in. The cafe was quiet for a Friday afternoon. It was one of those hipster spots with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, filled with the occasional hiss from the espresso machine and the soft murmur conversations behind chipped ceramic mugs. Amanda looked exactly the same, and yet somehow completely different. It's a strange thing to see someone after years of radio silence. You expect them to be frozen in time, preserved in the amber of your memory. But Amanda, she had evolved. She had the same eyes, dark and inquisitive, and the same habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. But there was a new quality to her now, a stillness. In college, she was frantic energy, always chasing deadlines and causes. Now, she carried a calmness in the way she sat, in the way she held her wine glass. It was a look of someone who had been knocked down by life, stood back up, and decided she wasn't going to be easily rattled again. We met at a small Italian place tucked between a used bookstore and a theater that had been closed for renovations for a decade. It was a kind of joint where the tablecloths were checkered red and white. The lights were always dimmed a little too low, and Frank Sinatra was perpetually humming in the background about summer winds. I slid into the booth across from her, feeling the tension of the last week momentarily loosen in my shoulders. She smiled, a real smile, not the tight, calculated grimace I'd been getting at home. "You look older," she said. No preamble, just truth. I laughed, startling myself. And you look exactly the same. Liar, she said, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. But I'll take it. We ordered a bottle of red wine, and the conversation slipped into place like a dislocated joint snapping back into the socket. It was painless, instant. We talked about the old days, obviously. That's where you start. We talked about the impossible professor who taught ethics and made us buy his own book. We laughed about the late-night coffee runs to the 24-hour diner that smelled like pine sol and bacon grease. Do you remember, she asked, swirling her wine, that time you dragged me to the poetry slam? You insisted it would be culturally enriching? I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Don't. You hated it, she laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I have never seen you so uncomfortable. You looked like you wanted to crawl out of your skin. I hated a guy who screamed about bees. I defended, pointing a breadstick at her. He screamed for 3 full minutes. Amanda, just a word, bees. That's not art. That's a pest control issue. She laughed, really laughed. It was a full, throaty sound that made a couple at the next table glance over. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since I'd heard a sound like that directed at me. Not polite laughter, not forced laughter to diffuse tension, but genuine, belly-deep amusement. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and the arrival of the carbonara, the conversation shifted. The nostalgia faded, and the present reality settled in. So, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming softer. How are things? Really? You mentioned complications. I looked down at my plate. I could have lied. I could have given her the highlight reel. Work is good. House is great. We're thinking about a vacation. That's what you do with old friends, right? You present the polished version. But I was so tired of polishing things that were rotting underneath. I told her the truth. I didn't plan to tell her everything. But once the dam cracked, the water rushed out. I told her about Claire, about Blake, about the late-night texts that were just memes. I told her about the gaslighting, the way she made me feel crazy for noticing the obvious. I told her about the girls-only party and the lie Troy had inadvertently exposed just yesterday. I told her about the emptiness in the house, the way Claire looked at me, or rather, looked through me, like I was a ghost haunting her life. Amanda didn't interrupt. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say, "Oh, I'm sure it's just a phase." She just listened. She watched me with those steady, dark eyes, absorbing the weight I was dumping on the table. When I finally exhaled, feeling drained but strangely lighter, silence settled over the booth. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy with understanding. Then, her hand reached across the table. It was a simple gesture, gentle and steady, covering mine where it rested on the checkered cloth. Her skin was warm. "You deserve better, Adam," she said. It wasn't the words that hit me. It was the way she said them. There was no pity in her voice, no judgment, just a quiet certainty of someone stating a fact, like saying the sky is blue. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was the voice of my insecurity, the voice Claire had been feeding for months. Maybe I am paranoid. Maybe friendships just look like that now. "No," she said simply. She squeezed my hand once, then pulled back. "You waited longer than most people would have. You're not crazy for needing respect in your own marriage. You're not crazy for wanting the truth." I nodded slowly, staring at the candle flickering between us. "I've been thinking about doing something." "Oh, Claire has this party next week. A mutual friend's engagement thing. Big deal, lots of people." I paused, running a thumb over the stem of my wine glass. She doesn't know I know about the lie. She thinks I'm still the clueless husband who buys her excuses. I know she'll be there. I know he will be there. Amanda tilted her head, studying me, and I want to go, I said. I want to walk in there. I want her to see me. But I don't want to walk in there alone. I don't want to be the sad, moping spouse standing in the corner while she works the room. I looked up at her. I want to walk in with my head high. Amanda's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. She knew what I was asking before I asked it. "You want me to come?" I didn't speak right away. I looked at her, really looked. There was no manipulative angle in her eyes. There was no hesitation, just sincerity. She wasn't doing this for drama. She was doing it for me. "Would you?" I finally asked. "It might be intense." She smiled, a small, mischievous curve of her lips. "Gladly." We paid the check and walked out into the cool evening air. The city was buzzing around us, Cars honking, distant sirens, the chatter of people on the sidewalk, but it felt like background noise in a film. We walked for a few blocks without a destination. The streetlights cast long, stretching shadows ahead of us. "Remember how we used to sit on the campus lawn until 2 a.m.?" she asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. "I remember," I said, "and I remember you used to bring those snacks you swore were healthy." They were. They tasted like sand. Amanda, literal sand. "They were chia oat bars," she said, mock-offended, bumping her shoulder against mine. "They were full of fiber." "They were punishment," I shot back, grinning. "I only ate them because I had a crush on you, and I didn't want to be rude." She stopped walking. I stopped too, turning to face her. The admission hung there for a second, a relic from the past that suddenly felt very relevant. She nudged me with her elbow again, softer this time. "You needed grounding back then. You were all chaos and last-minute essays." "Still am, sometimes." I admitted. She looked at me, her face serious now in the glow of a street lamp. "No," she said. You're not the same guy, Adam. You've grown. I can see it. The old Adam would have folded by now. He would have apologized for being upset. This Adam, he's standing his ground." I sat in the back corner, nursing a lukewarm coffee that I barely tasted. Across from me, Josh stirred cream into his cup, like it was a sacred ritual. Josh had been my best friend since college. He was the opposite of me in many ways. Laid back, unbothered, the kind of guy who could sleep through a hurricane. No drama, no flair, just a guy who always showed up. "So," he said after a beat, dropping the spoon onto his saucer with a clink, "you going to tell me what's been eating you alive lately? Or are we just pretending you love this place for the overpriced ambience?" I let out a breath. I felt like I'd been holding for 2 days. I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the stubble I hadn't bothered to shave. "It's Claire." Josh's eyes sharpened instantly. He stopped slouching. "What about her?" I hesitated. This was the part one hated. Thinking it was one thing. Saying out loud made it real. It solidified it into a fact rather than a nightmare. "I think she's seeing someone." He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just nodded slowly, absorbing it. "The guy you mentioned a while back?" "Blake." I nodded. Suddenly grateful I'd vented to him once before, even if I had downplayed it then. "Yeah, him. She swears they're just friends. Josh. She gaslights me every time I bring it up. But something's off. I feel it. The late messages. The evasive answers. Her whole vibe is different now. It's like living with a stranger." Josh leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Have you talked to her about it? Like, really talked?" "Plenty," I scoffed. "Every time I do, she turns it into my problem. Says I'm paranoid. Says I'm insecure." He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. The classic defense. Attack the accuser. I went through her iPad last night. I admitted, my voice dropping lower. I didn't find a smoking gun. No, I love yous or hotel bookings. But I saw enough. He was in the group chat for a girls' night she went to. She lied to my face about him being there. Josh was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. Then he set his mug down carefully. "Listen, Adam, I wasn't going to say anything unless you brought this up. I didn't want to be the guy stirring the pot if you were just going through a rough patch. But I noticed something weird." My heart rate ticked up. The cafe noise seemed to fade away. "What?" He hesitated, shifting in his seat. "A couple of weeks back, I was scrolling through Instagram. You know how it suggests people you might know?" "Yeah." "Well, I saw Claire's profile. And being the nosy friend I am, I clicked, and then I noticed something. It said she'd unfollowed Blake. I blinked. The world tilted slightly. "She what?" Josh shrugged. "I mean, it could have been a glitch. Or maybe she blocked him. But it stood out. If they're best friends, like she claims, why unfollow him?" A strange wave of something hit me. Hope, doubt, relief tangled with suspicion. "You're sure?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "Pretty sure," he said. "I checked again this morning before I came here. She's not following him. He's not following her." This was new information. This was a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture I had been building. Claire unfollowing Blake. That wasn't nothing. In the modern world, that was a move. That was a statement. And it wasn't one she'd want me to know about unless she was trying to fix something behind my back. Was she guilty? Was she ashamed? Had something happened between them that scared her? Or had I misjudged her altogether? Could be she's trying to make it right. Josh suggested, watching me carefully. Cutting him off. Doesn't mean everything's back to normal, but maybe she's starting to realize what she's risking. Maybe she realized she went too far. I didn't respond right away. A barista yawned in the corner. Someone flipped a page of a newspaper 2 tables down. I looked at my phone lying on the table. No messages. No missed calls. Maybe she was trying. Maybe the girls' night really was just friends, and Blake being in the chat was a remnant of the past. Maybe I had been wrong, but deep down I couldn't shake the unease. Because Claire didn't do things without a reason. She was strategic. If she unfollowed him, it wasn't just because she felt guilty. It was because she thought I might find out. It was damage control. Still, for the first time in days, my pulse slowed just a bit. Josh gave me a reassuring clap on the shoulder. "Whatever's going on, man," he said, his voice grounding me. "You'll handle it. You always do." I nodded, offering a small, weak smile. "Thanks, Josh." But inside, something still twisted. Because nothing in Claire's world was ever that simple. And I had a sinking feeling that the truth was still out there, just not where I'd been looking. And unfollowing someone on Instagram is a great way to hide a connection, not necessarily end one. "I need to verify it," I said, more to myself than him. "How?" "Tonight," I said, grabbing my keys. She thinks she's safe. She thinks I'm pacified. I'm going to see just how unfollowed they really are. Claire came back from the party just after 10. She didn't just walk through the door. She made an entrance. She was humming some upbeat, synth-pop song I didn't recognize, her heels clicking softly, rhythmically across the hardwood floor of the foyer. She tossed her coat onto the entry hook with a flourish, then drifted into the kitchen like she was floating on a cloud of helium. "Hey, babe," she called out. Her voice was too light, too airy. "We didn't burn the apartment down. You can relax now." I was sitting at the kitchen island, a newspaper spread out in front of me. I wasn't reading it. I'd been staring at the same headline about interest rates for 20 minutes. "Glad to hear it," I said, looking up. She looked glowing. That was the only word for it. Her hair was tousled, but in that perfectly messy way. Her cheeks were flushed a deep rose. Her eyeliner was still perfectly in place, sharp enough to cut glass. But there was something off about her energy. It was vibrating at a frequency that didn't match the room. It was too polished, too effortful. It was the look of someone overperforming happiness because they were terrified of the silence underneath. "The wine was awful, by the way," she added, breezing past me to rummage in the fridge. "And Dana brought those weird crackers that taste like cardboard again. I'm starving. I need real food." I watched her back. I watched the way her shoulders moved, loose and relaxed. "Girls only night, right?" I asked. "Yep," she replied, not missing a beat. She grabbed the leftover pasta container. "Same old gang. Just us, complaining about our bosses and debating which real housewife is the worst." I saw it then. A brief pause as she opened the Tupperware. A half-second freeze. A blink in her choreography. I didn't press. I didn't throw out the name. I didn't scream, "I saw the group chat, Claire. I know Blake was there." Instead, I turned a page of the newspaper. The paper crinkled loudly in the quiet kitchen. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip, letting her stew in the lack of questions. The only sound was a hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of her fork against the glass container. "You hungry?" she asked after a beat, her voice a little too casual now. She didn't turn around. "No," I said. "Already ate." We didn't talk much after that. She made herself a small plate, sat at the counter 3 seats away from me, and scrolled through her phone while chewing slowly. Her glances toward me grew more frequent. Darting eyes, checking my posture, checking my hands. I kept my posture loose, my face bored. I smiled when she looked up. She wasn't sure how much I knew, and I wasn't going to help her figure it out. That was the torture. That was the only power I had left. Later that evening, we brushed our teeth side by side like we had for 5 years. Only now, our reflections barely spoke. The mirror felt like a split screen. She caught my eye in the glass once, a flash of anxiety, then quickly looked down to spit. In bed, I turned out the lamp and lay still. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels heavy. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed on a nightstand. It was a sharp, vibrating sound that cut through the silence. Claire stirred beside me. She didn't speak, but her breathing shifted. It became controlled. She was awake. She was listening. She always noticed when my phone went off late. Usually she'd ask who it was. Work. Your mom. Tonight? Silence. I picked up the phone. The screen light was blinding in the dark. It was Amanda. Hey. Still in town. You around tomorrow? Let's catch up if you're free. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. Not because I was surprised I'd baited this hook earlier, but because something in me clicked. A bolt slid into place. I didn't reply right away. I just slid the phone under my pillow and lay there, staring at the ceiling. Claire shifted again. Everything okay? She whispered. Her voice was tight. Yeah, I said calmly. Just a friend. I felt her stiffen. At this hour? It's not that late, Claire. She didn't push. She couldn't. Not after tonight. Not after where she'd been. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week, I fell asleep before she did. Let her wonder. I wasn't playing defense anymore. The next morning, Claire was bright again. Aggressively so. She poured coffee, kissed my cheek, and asked if I had any big plans for the weekend. Maybe, I said, leaning against the counter. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a mask made of muscle memory. Oh, yeah. I replied, blowing on my coffee. Might meet Amanda. She's still around. Sent me a text last night. Claire blinked once. Just once. But her composure held. It was impressive, really. You guys always got along. I nodded. We really did. She's easy to talk to. Honest. I let that word hang in the air. Honest. Claire didn't say anything after that. She just sipped her coffee and looked out the window like it held the answers to a test she was failing. But I wasn't watching the view. I was watching her reflection in the glass. I saw the way her jaw tightened. I saw the way her throat worked as she swallowed. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was check. And I hadn't even moved my queen yet. I wasn't expecting to run into Troy that afternoon. I had gone out to clear my head, to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of the house. I was walking down Main Street, heading toward the corner cafe I liked, the one where the baristas didn't try to make small talk. I spotted him near the entrance, balancing 2 iced coffees and a bag of croissants like he was reenacting a slapstick comedy. Troy and Claire had been friends since college. He was a good guy, harmless, a bit oblivious. His wife, Melanie, knew everyone in that social circle, too. Adam, he called out, nearly dropping a cup. Hey, man. Long time. We exchanged the usual nods and quick greetings. He invited me to sit while he waited for Melanie to meet him. I accepted, mostly because I didn't have anywhere else to be. Small talk filled the first few minutes. Work, the cooling weather, the local football team's losing streak. It was numbingly normal. And then, casually, as if I were asking about the time, I dropped the line. Hey, I said, stir my black coffee. Claire mentioned Dana's party the other night. You can go with Mel? Troy furrowed his brow, confused. Which one? Girls only, apparently. I said, watching him closely. Dana's wine and board games night. Thursday. His mouth opened slightly. A look of recognition crossed his face. Then he laughed. Oh, man, that party. Yeah, I wasn't there, but Mel went. He took a sip of his drink, completely unaware he was about to rip the curtain down. Blake was there, right? Mel said. He showed up late with a bottle of rose. Said he looked like a bachelor party crasher. I felt it in my chest. A slow, spreading numbness. Like liquid nitrogen moving through my veins. Blake. Yeah, I said, my voice sounding far away to my own ears. I shook my head, careful to keep my face blank. Claire didn't mention that. She made it sound like it was just the girls. Troy frowned, looking puzzled. Huh? I could have sworn Mel said she saw Claire talking to him for a while. Thought they were all catching up. He shrugged, oblivious. You know how it is. Probably forgot to mention it. Anyway, Mel's been trying to convince Dana to bring her weird goat cheese to the next thing. Apparently it's a hit now. I don't remember much else of the conversation. It was just static. White noise. I nodded at the right times. I smiled when he laughed. I shook his hand when Melanie arrived. But inside, everything had gone cold. She lied. It was one thing to suspect it. It was one thing to see a name in a group chat. It was another thing entirely to hear confirmed by a third party. She had stood in our kitchen, looked me in the eye, and erased him from a narrative. She had constructed a reality where he didn't exist, where she was the innocent wife enjoying a night out, and she had done it so easily. When I got home, the walls felt closer than usual. The air was thicker, heavy with the scent of unsaid things. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds longer than I needed to, my keys still in hand, the door ajar behind me. I could hear her. Claire was in the kitchen again. That kitchen had become her stage. She was making tea, humming to herself, pretending nothing had shifted beneath her feet. "You're home early," she called out. Her voice was practiced, cheerful. I walked in. I didn't take off my coat. "Yeah," I said. "Ran into Troy." Her back was to me. She froze. The spoon in her hand stopped stirring. "Oh," she said. She didn't turn around. "How is he?" "Good," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Chatty." She turned then. Her smile was tight, fragile. "That's nice." "Yeah," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. We talked about the party. There it was, a flash of something, a blink. Her breath caught for half a second. He mentioned Blake was there. I said. My voice was level, calm, deadly. Her face went pale. Not dramatic movie pale, but subtle. The blood just drained out of her cheeks. He stopped by," she stammered. The smooth actress was gone. I didn't think it mattered. He wasn't there long, right? Just dropped something off. "Troy said he brought wine." I said he stayed. Said you two were talking for a while. Claire set her cup down gently on the counter. Her hand was shaking. "It wasn't like that, Adam." I nodded slowly. "No." "Then what was it like?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The gears were turning fast. She was searching for an angle, a pivot, a way to make this my fault. But she couldn't find one. She knew she'd been caught in a lie she couldn't explain away. "We didn't plan it," she said, her voice rising slightly. "He showed up. Everyone was surprised." I stared at her, really stared, and in that moment, something finally broke. Not in her, in me. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just breathed long and slow and saw the marriage for what it had become. An empty house filled with echoes of better days. "You've been lying," I said simply. She shook her head too quickly. "No, Yes," I interrupted. Softly. "You have. You lied about the party. You've lied about him. And even now, standing here, you're more worried about how this looks than what it is." Silence filled the space between us. It was heavy, suffocating. I picked up my phone. I didn't look at her. I thumbed through my texts and pulled up Amanda's last message. My reply was short. "Dinner tomorrow." Within seconds, her answer appeared. "Absolutely." I looked up at Claire. She was watching me, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted, like she didn't recognize a man in front of her anymore. "I'll be out tomorrow night," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Dinner," I said, turning back toward the hallway. I figured I'd catch up with someone honest for a change. She didn't respond. She just stood there in the ruins of her own performance. And for the first time, I didn't care if she watched me walk away. "I'm sorry, Claire," I said gently. She studied my face. She was looking for the crack. She was looking for the Adam who used to beg for her attention. "You're seeing her, aren't you?" she asked. "Amanda?" I didn't flinch. "We're taking it slow." "But yes." Claire nodded. She swallowed hard, looking away. Does she make you happy?" I thought about the succulent she bought me. I thought about the pizza, on the porch. I thought about the way she listened without interrupting. "She makes me feel peaceful," I said, "and right now that's better than happy." Claire let out a shaky breath. "I never gave you peace, did I? Even before Blake. I was always pushing, wanting more, wanting different. We were different people," I said. "We wanted different lives. You wanted an audience, Claire. I just wanted a partner." She wiped a tear from her cheek with a perfectly manicured thumb. "I saw Blake the other day." I stiffened slightly. "Oh, he was at a bar," she said, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "With a girl. She couldn't have been more than 23. He didn't even see me. Or he pretended not to." She looked at me, a desperate intensity in her eyes. "It meant nothing, Adam. All of it. I blew up my life for a phantom." "I know," I said, "but the explosion was real. And you can't unblow up a house." I checked my watch. Not because I was late, but because I needed to leave. Being near her was draining. Like standing next to a black hole that was trying to suck the light out of the room. "I have to get to the lawyer's office," I said. Claire nodded. She straightened up, pulling her coat tighter. She put the mask back on. The successful divorcee mask. "Right," she said. "Well, good luck, Adam. I hope the beach treats you well. Take care of yourself, Claire." I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. "Adam," I turned back. She was standing in the middle of the empty kitchen, looking small and lost in the white space. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. "Or was that just a habit?" I looked at her. I thought about the early days, the laughter, the way I felt when I proposed. "I loved you more than anything," I said honestly. That's why it hurt enough to leave. I opened the door and walked out. I didn't look back at the house. I got in my car and drove to the lawyer's office. I signed the papers. I handed over the keys. And just like that, I was homeless again. But this time, I wasn't drifting. I was free. I didn't drive straight back to the coast. Instead, I drove to a neighborhood on the north side of the city, a quiet street lined with oak trees that were stripped bare for winter. I parked in front of a brick walk-up. I texted, "I'm outside." A minute later, Amanda walked out. She was wearing a gray beanie and holding 2 travel mugs. She smiled when she saw me, a real unforced smile that reached her eyes. I got out of the car. "Hey," she said, handing me a mug. "Figured you'd need this. Closing day caffeine." "You're a lifesaver," I said, taking a sip. It was black, just how I liked it. She remembered. We leaned against the hood of my car. "How was it?" she asked. "Seeing the house?" Strange. I admitted, it felt like walking through a museum exhibit of my own life, like I was looking at artifacts from a civilization that died out. And Claire, she was there. Amanda looked at me, eyebrow raised. And nothing, I said. She looked sad. She looked lonely. And I felt bad for her, but I didn't feel anything for her. "The cord is cut, Amanda." Finally, Amanda nodded, looking satisfied. Good, because I didn't want to have to fight her. I laughed. "You'd win." "Oh, absolutely," she grinned. "I fight dirty. I use logic." We stood there for a while, drinking coffee in the cold air. It was simple. It was easy. There was no drama, no subtext, no game. "So," she said, "you heading back to the coast tonight?" "Yeah," I said. "I have a succulent to water. And the cottage gets drafty if I don't keep the heat on." She hesitated. She looked down at her boots, then back at me. "I have some vacation days coming up," she said casually. "Too many, actually. HR is yelling at me to use them before the end of the year." My heart did a slow, steady thrum in my chest. "Is that so?" "Yeah," she said. "I was thinking maybe the coast is nice in winter. I hear the storms are dramatic." I smiled. "They are. The roof leaks a little, and the floorboards scream." "Sounds terrible," she said, stepping closer. "When can I come?" "How about Friday?" "Friday works." She leaned up and kissed me. It wasn't a movie kiss. There were no fireworks, no swelling orchestra. It was a soft, warm pressure against my lips. It tasted like coffee and promise. It was grounding. "Drive safe, Adam," she whispered. "See you Friday," I said. I watched her walk back into her building. I waited until she was safely inside, until she waved from the window. Then I got back in my car. The drive back to the coast felt shorter this time. The wait was gone. The house was sold. The keys were returned. The ghost was exorcised. When I pulled up to my crooked little cottage, the sun was setting. The ocean was roaring, crashing against the shore with violent, beautiful indifference. I walked inside. I turned on the lamp. I watered the succulent. I sat down at my wobbly table and opened my laptop. I had work to do. I had a life to live. I was 32 years old. I was divorced. I was starting over. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't looking for an exit. I was exactly where I wanted to be. A few days later, I was at the grocery store in town, the one that sold bait in the refrigerated aisle next to milk, when I ran into Elias. He was buying a 6-pack of beer and a bag of dog food. "Adam," he boomed, "you're back. Thought maybe you'd gone city on us again." "Just for a day," I said. "Had to sell the old house." He nodded gravely, cutting the anchor. "Exactly. You look different," he noted, eyeing me. "Lighter." "People keep saying that." I laughed. "Well, it's true. You don't have that look in your eye anymore." "What look?" "The look of a man treading water," Elias said. "Now you look like a man who knows how to swim." We walked out to the parking lot together. "My friend is coming down on Friday," I said. "Amanda." Elias grinned, his leathery face crinkling. "The one with the plant?" "The one with the plant." "Good," he said. "Bring her by the dock. Buddy misses her. And I might have some fresh crab if the pots are full." "It's a date," I said. I drove home with the windows down. letting the freezing air numb my face. I felt alive, sharp, awake. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at it. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't the past calling to drag me back. It was a notification from my calendar. Friday, Amanda arrives. I smiled. I pulled into my driveway. The cottage looked ridiculous. A tiny box of light against a massive, dark ocean. But it was mine. I walked up the steps, the wood groaning under my boots. I unlocked the door. I was home. Not the home I had planned, not the home I had built with Claire, but a home I had carved out for myself. And on Friday, I wouldn't be alone. The tide had turned, and I was ready for whatever washed up next. The morning I left, the sky was a piercing, unapologetic blue. It was one of those crisp autumn days where the air feels scrubbed clean, the kind of weather that usually signals the start of school or football season, new beginnings disguised as endings. I didn't hire movers. I didn't want a crew of strangers tramping to the house, packing up the debris of my marriage into brown cardboard boxes. I wanted to do it myself. I needed to touch everything one last time to decide if it was worth carrying into my future. Turns out, not much was. I packed 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. Clothes. A few favorite books from the shelf in the living room. My laptop. The watch my grandfather gave me. I stood in the bedroom, looking at the closet. My side was empty, just a row of wire hangers chiming softly against each other when the AC kicked on. Claire's side was still full, bursting with color, textures, the life she would continue living in this house. I looked at the nightstand. The wedding photo was still there. It had been face down for weeks, but someone, maybe her, maybe the cleaning lady, had stood upright again. We looked so young in that picture, not just in years, but in spirit. We looked like we knew something the rest of the world didn't. I reached out, my thumb hovering over the glass. I thought about taking it. I thought about smashing it. In the end, I didn't either. I left it there. It belonged to the house now. It belonged to the ghost story. I zipped the final bag. The sound was loud in the quiet room, a final, jagged punctuation mark. I walked downstairs. The house echoed. It wasn't empty. The furniture was still there, the rugs, the art, but the life had been sucked out of it. It felt like a model home. Perfectly staged, completely soulless. Claire was waiting by the front door. She wasn't crying. I think she had run out of tears days ago. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her arms crossed tight over her chest, hugging herself. She looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. I set the bags down for a moment. This was it. The scene we'd been hurtling toward since the moment I saw that text message. "You got everything?" she asked. Her voice was soft, stripped of all the defensiveness, all the manipulation. "Everything I need," I said. She nodded, looking at my shoes. "Where will you go?" "South," I said. "For a few days. Then I'll figure out an apartment." She bit her lip. "Adam, She stopped, shook her head. "I know words don't matter anymore, but I really hope you find it." "Find what?" "Peace," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were sad, deep pools of regret. "I hope you find the peace I couldn't give you. You deserve to wake up without wondering." That hit me. It was the most honest thing she had said in years. "Thank you," I said. I didn't hug her. It would have felt like a lie. I didn't shake her hand. That would have been too businesslike. I just looked at her one last time, memorizing the face of the woman who had taught me how to love, and then, brutally, how to let go. "Goodbye, Claire." "Bye, Adam." I picked up the bags. I walked out the door. I walked down the path to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I put the bags in the trunk, closed the lid, and got into the driver's seat. I didn't look back at the window. I knew she was watching. I could feel it. But if I looked back, I might turn into a pillar of salt. So I put the car in drive, and I drove away. The first hour of the drive was silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the wind rushing past the windows. My brain was vibrating, trying to process the shift in reality. I am single. I am homeless, technically. I am free. That last word tasted strange. Freedom usually feels like triumph. This felt like survival. It felt like crawling out of a car wreck and realizing your limbs still worked. I drove for hours. I watched the landscape change. The suburban sprawl gave way to open fields, then to dense pine forests, and finally, as the afternoon sun began to dip, to the flat, marshy expanse of the coast. I didn't have a plan, but I had a direction. I ended up at a small beach town we had visited years ago, back in the before times. Back when we were broke and happy, staying in cheap motels and eating pizza on the boardwalk. I wasn't going there to wallow in nostalgia. I was going there to reclaim it. I wanted to see if the place still held magic without her. I checked into a small inn by the water. It wasn't fancy. The sign out front had a flickering neon letter, and the lobby smelled of salt and lemon polish. "Just one," the receptionist asked, barely looking up from a crossword puzzle. "Just one," I said. The room was simple. Faded floral curtains, a bed that looked too soft, and a sliding glass door that opened onto a tiny balcony. But beyond that glass, the ocean. I opened the door and the sound rushed in, the rhythmic, crashing roar of the Atlantic. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was perfect. I unpacked my few things. I put my toothbrush in the glass by the sink. I put my book on the nightstand. I claimed the space. That evening, as the sun began its descent, I walked down to the beach. The sand was cool under my feet. The beach was mostly empty. It was the off-season, the time for locals and drifters. I walked until I found a spot near the dunes, away from the few dog walkers and joggers. I sat down in the sand. I had a cold beer in my hand, the bottle sweating in the humid breeze. I took a sip and looked at the horizon. The sky was putting on a show, impossible shades of violent orange, bruising purple and soft, dying pink. The sun dipped low, looking heavy, like it was bowing out gracefully after a long fight. I breathed in. I held it. I breathed out. And for the first time in what felt like 6 months, the breath went all the way to the bottom of my lungs. There was no obstruction. There was no tightness in my chest. There was no anxiety fluttering in my stomach, wondering who was texting my wife, wondering if I was being paranoid, wondering if I was enough. The silence in my head was deafening, and it was beautiful. I wasn't happy. Not yet. Happiness is a project. But I was calm. I was safe in my own skin. I pulled out my phone. No new messages from Claire. No text from lawyers. No notifications from mutual friends trying to check in and gather gossip. But there was one message. It had come in 10 minutes ago. Amanda. 6 months later. The email landed in my inbox with a quiet little ping that betrayed the magnitude of what it contained. Subject: closing documents, 422 Maplewood Drive. I was sitting on my porch, watching the ocean turn a stormy, slate gray. The air was cold now. Winter had settled over the coast, but I still sat outside, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, drinking coffee that cooled too fast. I stared at the screen. The house. Our house. The place where we had picked out paint swatches called Sanctuary and Morning Light. The place where I had discovered the text messages. The place where I had packed my bags and walked out. It was sold. A young couple was buying it. They were probably excited. They were probably talking about where to put the Christmas tree and which room would be the nursery. They had no idea that the walls were soaked in the invisible ink of a failed marriage. I had to go back one last time. Not to live, obviously, but to sign the final deed and do the final walkthrough before the keys were handed over. The lawyer said I could do it remotely, but something in me needed to be there. I needed to see the period put at the end of the sentence. I drove back to the city on a Tuesday. The skyline looked different to me now. Crowded, sharp, aggressive. I didn't miss the traffic. I didn't miss the noise. I pulled into the driveway of 422 Maplewood. There was a sold sticker slapped across the for sale sign in the yard. The grass was a little overgrown. The flower beds Claire used to obsess over were brown and withered. I got out of the car. The front door was unlocked. I walked in. The echo hit me first. An empty house sounds different than a lived-in one. It has a hollow, metallic ring to it. Your footsteps sound like gunshots. The furniture was gone. The rugs were gone. The art was gone. It was just white walls and hardwood floors, stripped of all the personality we had tried to inject into it. I walked into the kitchen. The spot where the table used to be, the table where she told me I was spiraling, was just an empty square of floor. The island where she used to lean, and Tex Blake, was just a slab of cold quartz. It looks smaller, doesn't it? I turned around. Claire was standing in the doorway of the dining room. I hadn't heard her come in. She was wearing a beige trench coat, belted tight at the waist. Her hair was different. Shorter, chopped into a bob that looked sharp and professional. She looked good, polished, curated, but her eyes were tired. "Hey, Claire," I said. My voice didn't waver. My heart didn't race. It was just a greeting. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, walking into the room. Her heels clicked loudly on the wood. "The realtor said you were down south. Living the beach bum life. Fisherman life, mostly. I corrected with a small smile. And I had to sign the papers. She looked around the empty kitchen. She ran a hand over the counter, checking for dust. Old habits. I love this kitchen, she said softly. I always thought, I don't know, I thought we'd redo the backsplash eventually. Remember? We argued about subway tile versus herringbone. I remember, I said, you wanted herringbone. I said it was a trend. You were right, she said. She laughed, but it was a brittle sound. You were right about a lot of things. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. It was the same pose from the fight, but the power dynamic was completely inverted. She wasn't holding court anymore. She was clinging to the wreckage. How are you? I asked. I realized I actually meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I didn't have any energy left for her. She shrugged. I'm fine. Busy. Work is crazy. I got promoted. Congrats. Thanks, she said. She looked down at her boots. The apartment is nice. It's in the city, closer to the office. No yard work. Sounds practical. It's lonely, she blurted out. She looked up at me, her eyes wet. It's so loud in the city, Adam. But the apartment is so quiet. I go out with the girls. We drink, we laugh, and then I go home and it's just walls. I stood there, hands in my pockets. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to step forward. She wanted me to say, me too. She wanted validation that I was suffering just as much as she was, that our misery was equal. But it wasn't. The cottage I rented was, politely speaking, a disaster. The real estate agent had called it charming and rustic, which is realtor code for drafty and structurally questionable. The floorboards in the hallway groaned like a dying cello every time I stepped on them. The water pressure in the shower was suggestion rather than a force. And when the wind blew off the Atlantic, which it did constantly, the windows rattled in their frames like they were trying to escape. But I loved it. I loved it because it was honest. It didn't pretend to be a palace. It didn't hide its flaws behind expensive staging or mood lighting. It was a crooked, salty little shack that kept me dry and let me see the ocean from my kitchen table. It had been 3 months since I drove away from the perfect house in the suburbs. 3 months of silence. 3 months of rebuilding the infrastructure of my own brain. My routine was simple. I woke up at 6 a.m. I ran on the beach until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I worked from my laptop at a wobbly table near the window. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the tide come in, drinking cheap beer and listening to the nothingness. I was lonely, yes, but it was a clean kind of lonely. It wasn't the suffocating isolation of sitting next to a wife who was texting another man. This was solitary confinement by choice, and there was dignity in it. Then came the weekend Amanda visited. She had been threatening to come down for weeks, claiming she needed to inspect the premises to make sure I hadn't turned into a hermit with a volleyball for a best friend. When her car pulled into gravel driveway, kicking up dust, I felt a flutter in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. She stepped out, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf wrapped twice around her neck against the coastal chill. She held up a potted plant like a peace offering. It's a succulent, she announced before I could even say hello. Because I figured you forget to water it, and these things thrive on neglect. It's the perfect divorce pet. I laughed, taking the pot from her. Good to see you too. Amanda! She looked at the cottage. She tilted her head, squinting at the peeling paint on the porch railing. Well, she said, it has character. It has termites, probably. I said, opening the door. Come on in. The weekend was easy. That was the only word for it. With Claire, hosting had always been a production. The pillows had to be fluffed, the playlist curated, the snacks arranged on slate boards. It was a performance art piece designed for Instagram. With Amanda, we ate takeout pizza straight from a box. We drank wine out of mismatched mugs because I hadn't bought wine glasses yet. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching a storm roll in over the water. You look different, she said on Saturday night. The rain was drumming on the tin roof, a heavy, rhythmic sound that made the cottage feel like a ship at sea. Different how? I asked. More rugged? More weathered? Lighter, she said. You're not hunching your shoulders anymore. You used to walk around like you were bracing for impact. I took a sip of wine. I guess I was. She turned to look at me, her face illuminated by the soft yellow light of the porch lamp. Do you miss her? It was the question everyone was afraid to ask. My mom, Josh, even Elias the fisherman. They all tiptoed around the crater. Claire had left. Amanda just walked right up to the edge and looked in. I miss the idea of us. I admitted slowly. I miss having a partner. I miss the history. But do I miss her? The woman who lived in my house the last year? I shook my head. No, I don't miss the anxiety. I don't miss the gaslighting. Amanda nodded, watching the rain. Good. What about you? I asked, why did you come down here, really? She smiled, a small, enigmatic thing. Maybe I just want to see the ocean. Or maybe I want to see if the guy I used to study with was still in there somewhere. And, she said, leaning her head back against the chair, I think he's finally coming back. We didn't kiss. It wasn't that kind of movie, not yet, but there was a charge in the air, a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets. It was a feeling of being seen, truly seen, without having to perform. On Sunday afternoon, she packed up her car. Don't become a stranger, she said, hugging me. She smelled like rain and vanilla. I won't, I promised. Next time, I'll even buy real wine glasses. Don't you dare, she laughed. The mug adds to the ambience. I watched her drive away, feeling a pang of sadness, but it was a sweet sadness. It was the ache of something good ending, not the agony of something bad continuing. I went back inside. The cottage felt quieter without her, but it didn't feel empty. I made a coffee, sat down at my wobbly table, and opened my laptop to work. And then my phone rang. It buzzed aggressively against the wood of the table. I looked at the screen. My stomach dropped. Claire. I hadn't blocked her number. Part of it was practical, legal stuff, mail forwarding. Part of it was curiosity. Part of it was probably stupidity. I stared at the name. It was 4 p.m. on a Sunday. The Sunday scaries time. The time when the weekend is dying and the reality of the week ahead starts to settle in. I debated letting it go to voicemail. I should have let it go to voicemail. But I picked it up. Hello. My voice was calm. It surprised even me. Adam. Her voice was different. It wasn't the sharp, defensive tone of the kitchen fights. It wasn't the manic, performing voice of the parties. It was thick, slurred. Yeah, it's me, I said. Is everything okay? Did the lawyers miss something? She laughed, a wet, jagged sound. The lawyers? No, they didn't miss anything. They were very thorough. Efficient. Okay, I said, my guard going up. Then why are you calling, Claire? I saw a picture, she said. On Instagram. Josh posted a story. You were on a beach. There was a dog. That's Elias's dog, I said. Josh came down a few weeks ago. You looked happy, she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her an audit of my happiness. Are you? She asked. Happy. I'm getting there, I said. I'm peaceful. That's enough for now. Silence stretched over the line. I could hear background noise on her end. A TV playing too loud. The clinking of glass. Blake is gone, she said suddenly. I closed my eyes. I knew this was coming. I knew at the moment I signed the papers. But hearing it out loud was pathetic in a way I hadn't anticipated. Claire, I said, I don't need to know that. He got bored, she continued, ignoring me. She was rambling, peeling back the layers of her own mess. Once the sneaking around stopped, once it was just us, the thrill was gone. He didn't want a girlfriend, Adam. He wanted an audience. He wanted the ego boost of stealing someone else's wife. I told you that, I said. I didn't say it with malice. I said it with exhaustion. I told you that months ago. I know, she sobbed. The dam broke. I know you did. You were right. You were right about everything. I ruined it. I ruined us for nothing. She was crying now, the ugly, hiccuping cries of someone who has realized they burned down their own house to stay warm, and now they were just standing in the ashes, freezing. I'm so lonely, Adam, she whispered. The house is so big. It's so quiet. I walk around and I see you everywhere. I see you in the chair. I see you in the kitchen. I sat there, listening to the woman I had once promised to spend my life with. A year ago, this call would have destroyed me. I would have rushed to comfort her. I would have driven back. I would have tried to fix it. But now, I looked out the window. The ocean was gray and choppy, moving with an ancient, indifferent rhythm. I'm sorry you're hurting, Claire, I said. Can we? Her voice faltered. Is there any chance? Maybe in a few months? Maybe we could just get coffee? Start over? No. The word hung in the air. Absolute. Final. Adam, Please, she begged. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Claire. I said gently. It was a choice. You made 1,000 choices every single day to lie to me. You chose him. And now you have to live with that. I can't do this alone, she wept. You have to, I said. That's what leaving means. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I looked at the screen. I could still hear her crying, a tiny, tinny sound coming from the speaker. Goodbye, Claire, I said. I pressed the red button. The silence rushed back into the cottage. It wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, solid silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was pity. I realized then that I had won. Not the breakup. There are no winners in divorce. But I had won the aftermath. I had walked through the fire and come out scarred, but whole. She had walked into the fire and stayed there. She was still trapped in the drama, in the need for validation, in the chaos she created. I was free. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink. Then I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet wood and salt. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing streaks of deep twilight blue. I took a deep breath. I was alone. I was living in a drafty cottage with termites. I had a succulent I needed to not kill. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was okay. I walked down the steps, my boots sinking into the wet sand. I walked toward the water, leaving the phone and the ghost inside it, sitting on the kitchen table. I stared at the name. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I opened the text. Thinking about you today. Hope you're somewhere peaceful tonight. I looked at the ocean. I looked at the vast, terrifying, open water. I typed back slowly. I hit send. Then I put the phone away, buried it deep in my pocket. I leaned back in the sand, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear below the waterline. The darkness came, but I wasn't afraid of it. Darkness is just the absence of light. It's not a monster. It's just a reset button. I finished my beer. I stood up, brushing the sand from my jeans. Okay, I said to the waves. Okay. I turned back toward the lights of the town. I was alone. I was starting over from scratch at 32. I had a broken heart and a bruised ego, but I was walking forward. And for the first time in a long time, I liked the direction I was heading. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. There was no alarm clock, just the light filtering through the thin curtains. I lay there for a moment, confused, reaching instinctively for the other side of the bed. My hand hit cool sheets. The memory washed over me. Right? Divorce. Ocean. Freedom. I didn't feel the pang of sadness I expected. I felt rested. I got up, showered in the tiny fiberglass stall, and dressed in clean clothes. I walked into town to find coffee. The town was waking up. Shop owners were sweeping their stoops. The smell of frying bacon and salt air mixed in the street. I found a coffee shop with a patio and sat down with black coffee and a bagel. I opened my laptop. It was time to look for an apartment. It was time to look for a new life. I was scrolling through listings, overpriced studios, basement suites, condos with too many amenities, when a shadow fell over my table. I looked up. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't a lawyer. It was an older man, skin weathered like old leather, wearing a fisherman's cap. He was holding a leash, and at the end of it was a golden retriever that looked like it was smiling at me. Mind if we share the shade? The man asked. His voice was gravel and sea salt. Buddy here overheats if he stares at a bagel too long. I smiled. Go ahead. He sat down. The dog immediately rested its chin on my knee. He likes you, the man said. He's a good judge of character. Usually. I scratched the dog behind the ears. I'm in between characters right now, I said, trying to figure out who the new guy is. The man laughed. Ah, fresh start. Something like that. Best place for it, he said, gesturing to the ocean. The water doesn't care who you were yesterday. It just keeps moving. We talked for 20 minutes. His name was Elias. He was a retired commercial fisherman. He told me about the storms he'd seen, the catches he'd lost. He didn't ask about my ringless finger or the sad look in my eyes. He just talked about the sea. When he stood up to leave, he tipped his cap. Keep your head up, son. The tide always turns. I watched him walk away. The tide always turns. I looked back at my laptop. I closed the tab with the overpriced condos in the city. I typed a new search into bar. Apartments for rent. Coastal district. Why go back? Why return to the city that held the memories of the girls-only parties and the coffee shop where I dissected my marriage? My job was remote. I could work from anywhere. I found a listing. A small cottage, a few blocks from the water. It was drafty, probably, and small, but it had a porch. And it was here. I clicked contact agent. My phone buzzed. It was Josh. Checking in. Buddy, you alive? I typed back. More than I've been in a long time. I think I'm staying at the beach for a while. Josh replied instantly. Good. Send pics. And don't become a pirate. I laughed. A real laugh. I stood up, leaving the empty cup on the table. I had a viewing to schedule. I had a life to build. And as I walked down the street, breathing in the salt air, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving the fracture. I was healing. The bone would grow back stronger. It always does. The ghost in the kitchen was gone. I was just Adam again. And Adam was going to be okay. I turned to the therapist. She said she felt like furniture, like I didn't see her. I laughed a dry sound. I saw her every day. I supported her career changes. I listened to her vent for hours about colleagues I don't even know. I planned our vacations. I made sure the car was serviced and the bills were paid so she wouldn't have to stress. I leaned forward. I was building a life, I said, and she was building a fantasy. Claire sobbed quietly into her hands. I know I messed up. You didn't just mess up, Claire, I said. You rewrote reality. You looked me in the eye for months and lied. You made me feel crazy. You called me insecure when I asked about him. You weaponized my trust against me. I looked at Dr. Evans. I would have fought for us, I said, if she had come to me 6 months ago and said, Adam, I'm bored. I'm lonely. We need to fix this. I would have gone to the ends of the earth. I would have booked the trips. I would have changed my schedule. I would have done anything. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and hard. But she never gave me the chance. I whispered. She just replaced me. She buried the problem in charm and deflection, and I buried myself trying to believe her. The silence that followed was heavy. The air conditioning hummed. A clock ticked on the wall. Claire lowered the tissue. Her eyes were red, raw. I miss you, she whispered. I miss my best friend. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The jealousy was gone. Even the sadness was fading into a dull gray. I miss the person I thought you were, I said. Claire let out a sound like a wounded animal. Dr. Evans looked between us, closing her notepad. She knew. Any therapist worth their salt knows when a session is for healing and when it's for closure. This was a funeral service. It sounds like, Dr. Evans said softly, trust has been fundamentally broken. It hasn't been broken, I said. Standing up, it's been incinerated. I didn't wait for the session to officially end. I didn't wait to schedule a follow-up. Thank you, doctor, I said. I looked at Claire one last time. She was curled in the chair, looking at me with a devastation that, for the first time, felt entirely real. But it was too late. The statute of limitations on my empathy had run out. I'll see you at home, I said. I walked out. The drive back was strange. I didn't play music. I rolled the windows down and let the wind roar through the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I felt lighter. For months, I had been carrying a weight I couldn't name. I had been walking around with a stone in my shoe, limping, trying to pretend everything was fine. Now the shoe was off. The foot still hurt. Yeah, it was bleeding. But I wasn't walking on the stone anymore. I knew what I had to do. Claire arrived home 20 minutes after I did. She walked in, eyes puffy, looking exhausted. Adam, she started. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight, I said. I was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of water. She stopped. She nodded. She didn't argue. Okay, she whispered. And I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow, I added. She closed her eyes. Tears squeezed out, running down her cheeks. She nodded again. Okay. It ended with no screaming, no thrown vases, no dramatic accusations. Just a quiet agreement in a kitchen that had seen too much. The next 2 weeks were a blur of logistics. The divorce papers arrived 14 days later. They were crisp, white, and quiet. Claire left them on the kitchen table beside my coffee, like some kind of perverse peace offering. I picked them up. The paper felt heavy, expensive. Petition for a dissolution of marriage. I didn't rush to sign them, not because I was unsure. I had never been more sure of anything, but because I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to feel the weight of it. I sat there, staring at the signature line. I thought about the day we signed our marriage license. We had been laughing, tipsy on champagne, convinced that we were the exception to every rule. We thought love was enough. We were wrong. Love is just the fuel. Respect is the engine. And without the engine, the car doesn't move, no matter how much fuel you pour in. I took a pen from the drawer. The black ink flowed smoothly onto the page. Adam J. Mercer. I capped the pen. And just like that, with a few strokes of ink, 5 years of history became a legal precedent. I looked around the kitchen. The sun was streaming in, painting the tiles gold, just like it had the morning of the fight. But the spotlight didn't feel fake anymore. It just felt like light. It felt like the exit sign. Friday arrived with a nor'easter threatening the coast. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy and low, and the wind was already whipping the dune grass into a frenzy. Usually, a storm like this would have made me anxious. In the old house, on Maplewood Drive, a storm meant worrying about the gutters, worrying about the power going out, worrying about Claire's mood shifting with the barometric pressure. But here, in my crooked little cottage, the storm just felt like a show. I spent the morning preparing. With Claire, preparing for a guest, even a friend, was a military operation. It involved decluttering surfaces, buying expensive candles that smelled like sandalwood and judgment, and curating a playlist that said, "We are relaxed and successful." With Amanda coming, my preparation was different. I went to the grocery store and bought ingredients for tacos, messy, unpretentious, delicious. I bought a bottle of wine that didn't cost $40. I swept the sand off the porch, knowing full well the wind would blow it right back in 10 minutes later. I wasn't trying to impress her. I was just making space for her. At 4 p.m., her car pulled into the driveway. The gravel crunched under her tires, a sound that had become my favorite notification. I walked out to meet her. The wind hit us both, blowing her hair across her face. She was laughing as she stepped out of the car, fighting with her scarf. "You really ordered the full experience, didn't you?" she shouted over the wind. "Dramatic weather included?" I pulled some strings. I yelled back. I grabbed her bag. We ran inside, escaping the biting cold. When the door clicked shut, the silence of the cottage wrapped around us. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of my marriage. It was a cozy, insulated silence. She took off her coat, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She looked around the main room, the wobbly table, the succulent sitting bravely on the windowsill, the stack of books by the armchair. "It's perfect," she said. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for the draft or the mismatched furniture. "I like it," I said. We spent the evening cooking. And this, right here, was the moment I knew I was going to be okay. I was chopping onions. Amanda was manning the stove, browning the meat. We were drinking wine and listening to an old jazz record I'd found at a thrift store. "Oops," she said suddenly. I looked over. She had been distracted by the music and let the pan get too hot. A plume of smoke rose up. The meat was definitely scorched on one side. My stomach tightened instinctively. It was a reflex, a phantom limb pain from my past. In my old life, this was a start of fight. You're not paying attention. Why do I have to do everything? Great, now dinner's ruined. The air would turn cold. The silent treatment would start. I braced myself for the shift in energy. But Amanda just laughed. She waved a towel at the smoke detector before it could go off. "Well," she said, grinning at me, "I hope you like your tacos Cajun style. Or charcoal style." I looked at her. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't waiting for me to scold her. She was just human. The tension in my chest unspooled. I laughed. A real deep belly laugh. "Charcoal is good for digestion," I said, grabbing the salsa. "We'll drown it in hot sauce. No one will know." "That's the spirit," she said, pouring more wine. We ate the slightly burnt tacos sitting on the floor by the electric heater because the table was covered in my work papers. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about her job, my running routine, the weird fisherman gossip Elias had told me. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't talk about Blake. We didn't talk about the divorce papers that were now filed away in a drawer somewhere. That ghost had no seat at this table. Later that night, the storm finally broke open. Rain lashed against the windows like gravel. The wind howled around the eaves, making the whole cottage shudder. We were sitting on the couch, a lumpy, second-hand thing I'd covered with blanket. Amanda's head was on my shoulder. My arm was around her. "Do you think the roof will hold?" she asked sleepily. I looked up at the exposed beams. They were rough-hewn, old, and scarred. "It's held for 50 years," I said. "It's seen worse than this." "Like you," she murmured. I looked down at her. "What?" "You," she said, looking up. Her eyes were dark and steady. "You've weathered the storm, Adam. You're still standing." I kissed her forehead. I had a good anchor. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The sky was a piercing, innocent blue, and the ocean was churning with whitecaps, energized by the storm. We walked down to the docks to find Elias. The air was cold enough to see our breath, sharp and salty. Elias was there, untangling a net. Buddy, the golden retriever, spotted us from 50 yards away and came bounding down the pier, a golden missile of joy. "Careful," Elias shouted, though he was grinning. "He's wet and he has no manners." Buddy slammed into my legs, then Amanda's, covering us both in wet dog hair and sand. "He approves," Elias said, walking over. He wiped his hands on a rag and tipped his cap to Amanda. "You must be the one who finally got him to smile." Amanda smiled, scratching Buddy behind the ears. "I think he did that on his own, Elias. I just brought the plant." "Plants help," Elias nodded sagely. "So does time, and good company." We stood there for a while, watching the boats bob in harbor. I looked at Elias, an old man who had lived 1,000 lives on this water. I looked at Amanda, a woman who had known me when I was a boy and liked me enough to find me when I was a broken man. I realized then that I wasn't just starting over. That phrase implies you're back at zero. I wasn't at zero. I was at 32, with scars, with experience, with a better bullshit detector, and with a clearer idea of what love actually looked like. Love wasn't performance. It wasn't a constant negotiation. It wasn't walking on eggshells to avoid cracking someone's fragile ego. Love was burnt tacos. Love was a drafty cottage. Love was standing on a dock in freezing wind and feeling warm because the person next to you was holding your hand. "We should get going," Amanda said eventually. "I promise to help you fix that loose step on the porch before I leave." "You know how to fix a step?" Elias asked, impressed. "My dad was a contractor," she said. "And Adam owns a hammer he's afraid to use." "I am not afraid of it," I protested. "I respect its power." Elias laughed, a sound like gravel in a mixer. "She's a keeper, son. Don't mess it up." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. Sunday evening came too fast. The Sunday scaries tried to creep in, that old habit of dreading the week ahead, but they couldn't find a foothold. I walked Amanda to her car. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the gravel. "So," she said, leaning against the door, "when are you coming up to the city?" "I have a succulent that needs inspection." "Next weekend," I said without hesitation. "I'll take the train." "Good." She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took my hands. "You're happy, aren't you?" she asked. I thought about the question. It was the same one Claire had asked me over the phone, but the intent was entirely different. Claire had asked it to gauge her own misery. Amanda was asking because she cared. "I am," I said. "It's a quiet kind of happy. But yeah, I'm happy." "That's all I wanted," she said. She kissed me goodbye, a lingering kiss that promised there was more to come, and got into her car. I watched her drive away until her taillights disappeared around the bend of the coastal road. I didn't feel the crushing loneliness I used to feel when Claire would leave for a business trip or a girls' night. I felt the comfortable solitude of a man who knows he is loved, even when he is alone. I walked back into the cottage. It was quiet. The wind rattled the window pane. The floorboard groaned under my step. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I looked at the spot on the table where my phone sat. For a second, just a split second, I thought about checking Claire's Instagram. It was a muscle memory, an old addiction. I wondered what she was doing. I wondered if she was posting a photo of a glass of wine with a caption about self-care to hide the emptiness. I reached for the phone, but instead of opening the app, I opened my contacts. I scrolled down to Claire. I hit edit. I hit delete contact. "Are you sure?" The screen asked me. I looked at the words. Was I sure? I thought about the lies, the gaslighting, the ghosts in the kitchen. I thought about the man I used to be, the anxious, suspicious, diminished version of Adam. Then I thought about the burnt tacos. I thought about the ocean. I thought about the man Elias saw when he looked at me now. Yes, I tapped the screen. The name vanished. I put the phone down. I walked out to the porch and sat in the Adirondack chair. The ocean was dark now, a vast, breathing entity under the stars. The lighthouse down the point swept its beam across the water. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't waiting for the text message that would ruin my night. I wasn't waiting for permission to live my life. I took a sip of the cold night air. It tasted like salt and freedom. I was Adam. I was divorced. I was broke. I lived in a shack. And I had never been richer. The tide had gone out, taking the wreckage of the past with it. And as I sat there, listening to the rhythm of the waves, I knew the only thing that mattered was what the next tide would bring in. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the sound of my own steady heartbeat. It was a good sound. It was the sound of a ghost coming back to life.